This is the Arctic Bionix P120 ARGB, a 120mm pressure optimized addressable RGB fan from a company that has a proven track record of producing some excellent cooling solutions, including fans that come extremely close to noctuas in terms of cooling performance. And when they reached out to see if I wanted to take a look at the BioniX P120 ARGB, which comes in both a single pack and a triple pack with a fan controller, and both are very well priced, by the way, my first thought was these could actually be the best performing fans with addressable RGB. So in this video, I'm going to unpack everything that you need to know. The TLDR is, these are pretty great fans. The performance is there. The way that the RGB connects together is absolutely one of the best, purely because of this tiny little thing and this cable. I'll show you more in a bit, but they're not perfect. And they also don't seem to know what problem they're trying to solve. They might not even be compatible for your use case. So let me explain why these fans are both amazing and have a bit of an identity crisis. Let's do this. Okay, so first things first, I want to show you guys the unboxing of both the 3-pack and the single pack, talk to you about the specs whilst we're doing it. After that, we're going to go over the performance numbers, how these fans stack up against other high performance options, before looking into the RGB and what just happened there and what makes these fans so cool. But let's start with the unboxing. So let's take a look at the single pack before we see how the triple pack differs. Inside the box, you're first greeted with your accessories kit, before then finding your fan and instruction manual. So let's find out what accessories Arctic have decided to give you. Of course, you have your fan screws, which I really would prefer to be black, and then this tiny little bridge connector. More on that in a bit. You have this odd looking cable with an ARGB and PWM header attached, and then this odd looking cable too, with some other weird connectors. I promise you this will all make sense very soon. But let's take a look at the fan. It's a pressure optimized 120mm fan with an RPM range of 400 to 2300. They state that the airflow is 48 cubic feet per minute or 81.55 cubic meters per hour. The static pressure is 2.1mm H2O and it uses fluid dynamic bearings. But the thing that you immediately notice while holding it is that this is a chunky boy. It's 30mm deep. Now this might cause some issues, which we will get into in a bit, but with an extra 5mm, we're going to go over where and why this might not work for you and where Arctic are trying to help you resolve that. But before we get into that, let's see how the triple pack differs from the single pack. Of course, when you open it, you get 3 fans instead of 1, and your accessories kit is much larger. So let's see what's inside that. You'll first be greeted with your ARGB controller. Now this one's quite interesting. It takes a 4-pin non-addressable RGB input and passes that through to the fans. Or you can use the included remote to give you addressable RGB functionality. So if you don't have an addressable RGB header on your motherboard, this is a good option. It can also be attached to your case using most drive bays or using the included adhesive or magnetic strips. And some of those cables from before are starting to look a little more familiar. So let me show you what these cables are, how they work, and then we'll get into the fans' performance numbers. Okay, so let me show you the best way to get these fans set up with your PC. Now the first thing that you're going to need is one of the funky cables that I showed you earlier. The first one is this one. Now you'll see, as I showed you before, you've got a PWM fan header and a 50/50 ARGB. That's the 3-pin, one of them being blanked in the middle. Now this one can go to any addressable source. Most people will be connecting it to their motherboard, but also if you have a separate ARGB controller, you can plug that into there. And the PWM, of course, goes to the PWM header on your motherboard to control the fan speed. But this end of the adapter is where it gets a bit unique and interesting. And actually one of the reasons why I really like these fans and how the ARGB connects. So this end has a white end on it on the 7-pin connector. So what you'll do is you'll head over to your fans and you'll see that it has a white end too. So you line it up and connect that. There we go. So then you just need to grab the other end, plug it into your ARGB source, bibbidi babbidi boop. And there we go. And to be honest, there's nothing special about this so far, apart from a weird connector. But where it does get really interesting is when you want to connect multiple fans together. Let's have a look at this connector. Same 7-pin connector that I showed you earlier, but it has a black end on the other side. So what we're going to do is bring the fan back from earlier, connect the black side into the black part of the fan, grab another fan, plug that in. And there we go. You can see that it's actually daisy chaining the ARGB. Now it is pure daisy chaining. There's no splitter or duplication. You can see that it's going from this corner here, round, and then over to this one, and then round again. So it is passing the RGB values through the fans. Now what if you have fans close together? Say you want to mount them to a radiator and you don't really have space for a cable like this. Well, in comes this little bridge adapter. Now this does exactly what this cable does, but without the cable. They just connect together like so, from one end, and then just slide that into the fan. There you have it. Now this implementation is pretty incredible. It means that you can keep on adding fans to the stack, say 240, 360mm radiator in the front, and then on the top of your case you can have, say, two 120s to exhaust out, and then at the back you can have another 120 to exhaust out, all running 2 cables to your motherboard. That is great. For those of you complaining that there's too many cables with ARGB products, this is the solution to that. And this implementation is actually a relatively cheap one compared to like custom connectors where fans slot into one another, like the new Lee fans, which means that the cost of these fans is significantly less than that. And that is something that I approve, is more features, more flexibility, low cost. I love that implementation. So the ARGB, of course, it does daisy chain down, and also your PWM. So if you plug this into your fan source, for you would typically be a motherboard, there we go. This is running at 5 volts at the moment, so I can't tell you the speed, but that is quiet. That is really quiet. But there is another way to set these fans up, although I do believe it will be the less common way. You can use the included adapter that comes with the 3-pack. It takes SATA power, which is a nice touch, and also this weird connector that does the same thing as the fan to motherboard cable that I showed you earlier. So again, you've got your 4-pin PWM fan header, but you've also got a 4-pin non-addressable RGB header. Now what this does on the other side is you plug this into the RGB controller, and what that will allow you to do is pass non-addressable RGB through the controller to light up all the fans the same color, or it will unlock RGB controls with the included remote. There we go. But I assume that that would be less common for you guys, as I'm sure most of you have ARGB motherboards. But there are a couple things that you really need to know about these fans, and the reason why I say that they have an identity crisis. You see, they're pressure optimized fans, and what that means is that they're better suited to actually flow air through a radiator or through a CPU cooler. With pressure optimized, they're better at getting that air through an obstruction, being fins. But they're 30mm thick. And that's kind of counterintuitive because the fact that they're thick makes them most compatible as case fans, which don't need to be pressure optimized. You see, most fans stick to the 25mm depth standard, like so. That's the Noctua NFF12. And then being 30mm means that they actually have difficulty fitting where you would imagine putting a pressure optimized fan. Let me show you. See, the Noctua NHU12S cooler that we have on here, it doesn't actually interfere with the memory modules, even if we had taller ones like the Vengeance Pro that I typically use. I've tested it on that. And if we grab a clip from somewhere, you can actually force this clip on. The only problem being is that with 5mm extra thickness, there we go, you're really contorting this clip to stay on that fan. But another thing to consider is that there's a reason why a lot of these fans are designed like that, is that they have a cut in the middle, is because this air cooler does mount to the outermost, if you're mounting from there round to the CPU air cooler. Now, a lot of air coolers mount on the innermost hole, and that just wouldn't work for these fans, purely because they don't have that cutout. So what that means is, especially for CPU air coolers, your compatibility with this fan and an air cooler is very questionable because it works in this solution, NHU12S, if you're running that, you're probably fine. But if you have a different air cooler, I can't tell you whether you're going to be fine or not. There's just no way of really telling. But where most people I think are likely going to be using these are in radiators. And again, it produces a similar problem. Let's take a look at these two, for example. This is the IDCooling Zoomflow 240X, and this is the Corsair H100i ARGB Platinum. They have so many H100i's. So this one is actually a Cool-It cooler, and this one is an Acertec cooler. They're the OEMs that actually design and build these coolers, so the IDCooling and Corsair can then customize and put their logos on them. So with the Cool-It liquid cooler, they actually supply screws long enough to accommodate a 30mm fan, which is great. But Acertec is by far the most common manufacturer of these liquid coolers. They actually don't supply screws long enough for a 30mm fan. But Arctic do have you covered. They're actually supplying screws long enough for closed loop liquid coolers. And if you didn't get any in your fan box, be the single pack or the triple pack, contact them directly and I'll leave information on that, how to do that in the video description. So check that out. And I'm actually quite impressed that they've committed to that. It's good that they're listening to the community and hearing how people want to mount these, the limitations with the fan, and trying their best to resolve it. So thumbs up, Arctic. So to recap, the RGB is pretty phenomenal. If you want to use it for a CPU air cooler, either don't or very much check your compatibility because it's going to be all over the place. If you want to use it for a closed loop liquid cooler, you absolutely should be fine, especially with them supplying long enough screws for your liquid coolers. And if you want to use them as case fans, they're absolutely going to be awesome. But the question is, are they any good? So what we're going to do is compare them to the P12s of Arctic. These are phenomenal, incredibly good budget fans. The Noctua NFF12, a pretty legendary fan, but also test against the original BioniX. Now, this will be an interesting test because I want to see if adding ARGB has hindered any performance of these fans or helped it, because we all know that ARGB adds FPS. This is a well-known fact. But will it minus Cs? Minus Cs? Let's run with it. So in our first test with the fans attached to the Noctua NHU12S, although testing on an air cooler does seem counterintuitive, the NHU12S does have big enough fin spacing that we can consider this test to be more airflow biased compared to our upcoming liquid cooler pressure optimized testing. The CPU that we're using is a Ryzen 9 5950X 16 core to really push the limits of these fans. And the BioniX P120 ARGB does a great job cooling, beating all of the other fans in the lineup at each fan speed percentage. In most cases, however, this is at a significantly higher fan speed. So we should also compare the closest matched fan rotational speeds between all of the fans. And here we can see when speed normalized, the NFF12s win out, followed by the P12s, while the BioniX ARGB is basically on par with the original BioniX, and everything beats out the Corsair SP120 Pros that come with the H100i Platinum. So let's see how they sound at these speeds. And then once more at their closest RPM match speed as shown in our testing. Honestly, I think the BioniX ARGB sounds most similar to the P12, which is kind of odd because I also think that the BioniX non-ARGB sounds the best. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. So moving over to our radiator test, same 16-core 5950X, we see a similar scaling of results. In terms of raw performance, the BioniX P120 ARGBs come out on top, with the most significant lead being against the stock fans for the H100i RGB Platinum, which makes them a really great option for upgrading your liquid coolers fans. So when we speed normalize the results as we did before, this shows a tight grouping between the BioniX ARGB, and the P12s, with the P12s and the BioniX ARGB being measurably quieter. You might think this is approaching margin of error territory, but the results and the difference between the fans were very consistent over 5 runs. So the Arctic Bionix P120 ARGB. The RGB connection is pretty amazing. It held its own against some of the best high performance fans on the market, and that is no small feat for an ARGB fan, and likely makes it one of the best performing RGB fans out there. But they do have their limitations. It's almost impossible to recommend this for you as a CPU fan without knowing your configuration, but if you want to use them as a case fan, they would be great. If you want to use them as a radiator fan, they would also be great, as shown in our testing. Just make sure that you do have the longer screws from Arctic if you don't know whether your radiator screws will fit. And for only $25 for a single pack or $50 for a triple pack, it makes them incredibly good value. So if you want to grab a set, I will drop links in the video description with updated pricing. But if you're not subscribed, get subscribed, turn on notifications to make sure that you don't miss any more upcoming Tech Lens content. Any more upcoming Tech Lens content? Sure, why not? Anyways guys, a like is always appreciated. I'll see you in the next one.